Good evening. The claim now moving fast is that you Astinque, Tiesin Midi, Isamshin, Kwanan Mitao, never first push it out Strait of Hormuz to even the passage for oil tankers after Iranian mins were laid across to Wishinel. If that is accurate, this is not a routine naval movement. It is one of the most dangerous forms of maritime combat. Because the threat is mostly invisible, the room for error is tiny and the consequences reach far beyond the battlefield. When a narrow energy corridor is made insurance rate jam, tanker traffic hesitates, oil prices racked, and every government with an admit with an economic shake in Gulf shipping started and calculating risk am chow to call them fies the shaft and chum stancher. Tank with includes and with what tough as a chas it test. The visible event is military. The deeper issue is control. What dive this scenario credibility is not the dramatic language around it, but the basic military logic. Modern naval mines are a real and serious threat. His are not need to float in plain sight. The constant on the seabed remain difficult to detect and to go through magnetic, acoustic, or pressure signatures. That part is technically sound. A navy entering a mine point would have to slow down, widen surveillance, and accept a level of vulnerability that commanders said a commander's hate. Commanders sentenced the banner scan to homage to point. Put simply, this is no longer detail. And at East Gueda Strait of Hormuz matters so much. This is not just another body of water. It is one of the world's most sensitive maritime bottlenecks. And disruption theory is never merely local. It tests energy markets, shipping, startles, regional deterrence, and the credibility of any power that claims it can keep sea lanes open. If a hostile actor can mine the road and hold traffic at risk, even temporarily, it sends a message worldwide in the Gulf. It says that economic pressure can be created cheaply, asymmetrically, and at a pace faster than diplomacy can respond. The strongest part of this scenario is the micro challenge shift-off. That way will lure detection, remote systems, helicopters, thunder divers, and combat cover at the same time. That is slow work under the best conditions. In a narrow strait and the threat of drones and missiles, it becomes even more dangerous. A fleet doing my countermeasures is not moving like any still force. It is creeping, standing, waiting, exposing itself. That matters because speed is usually protection at sea. Here the mission forced the opposite, but this is also where the framing deserves scrutiny. The dramatic conclusion often pushed it in made a road like this is that once a mine is found and destroyed, the road is effectively riven 10 a Persian children of original colonist Renard and Passionalis. Realistically, that is to need one confirm my probe standard. It does not probe the full pattern of the minefield. It does not confirm how many devices were laid, whether they were entered or bottomized, whether decoys were eased or whether decoys were ridged, or whether regional waves of many could follow. The strong fact is that mine warfare can paralyze shipping. The West leap is pretending that neutralizing one can take resolve the strategic problem. Here is another pressure point too that matters just as much. Mine clearance is not only a technical task, it is a political signal. If SS force are fired into deliberate public mine clearing operations in Hormuz, that means the confrontation haze already moved and signaling into a test of will. The question becomes larger than safe passage for tankers. It becomes whether Washington can enforce freedom of navigation without being pulled into a broader cycle of retaliation. That is where analysis becomes more important than repetition, because unsuccessful slows in confident waiters every threat grows sharper. Drones become more easeful, coastal missiles become more relevant, surveillance becomes more valuable. Even if our attack can have strategic effect if it forces shipping firms to delay movement and promises markets that the criteria is unstable. The real concern is the consequence behind it. MI does not need to single war ship to see politically. It may only need to create hesitation. So the central question is not whether NAB has the equipment to destroy miss. It does. The real question is whether clearing a path also restores deterrence, or whether it similarly opens the next phase of its place. And that is where the pressure is now building. What makes this situation more dangerous is that mine warfare is designed to distort the balance between consequence spends and assist situation mines. Land mines is relatively cheap compared with maintaining a large surface fleet. Clearing them is slow, expensive, manpower intensive, and politically exposed. That asymmetry is the point. A state under pressure does not need to defeat a superior navy in open battle if it can force the navy to pressure depression, that a direction aside, a Russian portion instead of Russian order on a road corridor under constant threat. This is why the framing matters. The issue is not only whether a passage can be reopened. It is whether the reopening can be sustained at an acceptable military and economic cost. That is also why the mention of layered Iranian threats deserves serious attention, but not a medic as a jurisdiction. The Briscoe-Jones coastal missile fat attack craft. A surveillance network in around the Gulf is credible. Iran has spent years building a strategy on land harassment, denial, and intrusion rather than classical fleet-on-fleet warfare. In that kind of environment, a minefield is not a standalone weapon. It is part of a larger chap. The mine slows you down. The slowdown makes you easier to track. Untracked, you become more vulnerable to everything else. The visible development is only the surface. Still, this is where the logic bends to strain in some of the more dramatic presentations. A fully choreographed sequence in which the first descent identify a mine, withdraw, deploy a disposal vehicle, detonate the charge, test the deck guns, and steadily ripen the route can sound clean and deceive. Real operations are rarely that tidy. Publicly available information may support the general methods described. Navies do use remote systems, helicopter, sonar, and explosive ordnance disposal teams for this kind of work, but a malicious sequence should not be confused to verify chronology. At this stage, the existence of a mine threat and the procedures for dealing with it are far easier to believe than any claim that the health situation is already under con. That distinction matters because markets and governments do not rate to tackle success alone, they rate to uncertainty. Even if naval force can clear a limited lane, commercial operators still have to judge whether the route is safe enough to trust. Tanker companies, insurers, and commodity traders will not make that call based on one destroyed device or one successful transit. They will ask harder questions. How wide is the cleared channel? How often must it be swept again? Can escorts be guaranteed? Is the threat of renewed mining contained? Could the next incident happen without warning? This is why military success did not automatically become land strategic success. There is also a larger institutional test here. If Washington presents itself as the guarantor of maritime then every disruption in Hormuz becomes a possibility challenged. Allies in the Gulf watch closely. Energy importing states in Asia watch closely. Financial markets watch even more closely. If the United States responds too weakly, deterrence erodes. If it responds too aggressively, it risks widening the conflict and turning a navigation crisis into a regional war. That is the dilemma beneath the headlines. The central pressure point is not action versus inaction. It is which form of action produces fewer long-term costs. And that brings us to the deeper contradiction. Riveting a strait is a military mission. Keeping it open is a political and strategic burden. The first cost can be measured in ships, aircraft, sonar contacts, and hours of clearance work. The second is measured in endurance, signaling elongation, and tolerance for escalation. That is a much harder equation. A navy can remove mice from weather. It cannot easily remove the fear those mice create in global commerce once the threat has been demonstrated. So the most serious takeaway is not the image of a lead pushing forward. It is a reminder that Chopin refers to the reactors, a way to impose global costs with limited tools. If this dynamic is now active, then the real fight is no longer just about one channel of water. It is about who can shape risk, who can absorb it, and who decides when trade can resume. And the end result of the question is whether this operation, even if tactically effectively is stabilizing the Gulf or merely managing the bending for softening, valving for the thinking weather. What matters now is not the spectacle of warship moving through a narrow channel. It is the deeper fact that unsatiable point can be treated the debate is no longer only military. It becomes economic, political, and psychological. A mine in the water is dangerous. A loss of confidence in the road is worse. That is the real risk here. Even if one lane is cleared, even if one compass is true, the larger question remains unresolved. Has speed been restored, or has the will just been shown how vulnerable this corridor really is? That is the contradiction sitting underneath every headline. If this pressure keeps building, the cost will not be limited to the Gulf. It will reach energy markets, saving decisions, islands' credibility, and the wider balance between deterrence and escalation. And if the danger has been overstated, that matters too, because inflated framing can drive reckless princess Julius Binder had been as Miners 10. So this story is not over. The next development will matter more than the last statement because it will show whether this was a contained operation or the start of a greater confrontation. Leave your view in the comments. Was this a genuine restoration of control or only a temporary show of farce in a corridor that remains instable? Follow the next turn in the story and subscribe so you do not miss the next shift.